幸有这个机会在厦门快40年的家里分享一下。So TEDx is about what? TEDx is about sharing ideas. But the problem is sharing ideas, there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties, mainly because of our perception. We think we are very objective, that we see things clearly and logically, but we don't. Even when you communicate with family, friends you know, we have miscommunication. But if you try to share an idea with somebody you do not know, a stranger, or a foreigner, or maybe a strange foreigner from other countries, other cultures, it's even harder to communicate clearly. So I want to explain just briefly about why we have these communication problems and just some of my ideas of ways I've tried to overcome them in communicating cross-culturally. Even your best friend, you may have trouble communicating. Well, first I'll tell you, I think that usually I communicate okay, but sometimes I make big, stupid mistakes. And the biggest mistake I ever made was one of the most important things in my life. In 1981, I asked Susan Marie to marry me. Asking a girl to marry you is very important. So how did she reply? She laughed at me. She said, yeah, right. I said, I asked you to marry me and you laugh? And she said, you're joking, right? I said, I joke about a lot of things, but I won't joke about marriage. She said, really? I said, of course. And she said, oh. So she said, okay, she married me. Obviously, it's so bad. But she told all her friends for 40 years, this was the worst marriage proposal in history. I said, well, at least it worked. And the next time I ask a girl to marry me, I will do better. But think about it. I mean, it's really funny now, 50 years later, but at that time, it was quite a shock. But it was actually a shock to me as well. So if you can make such mistakes with your best friend, what about when you're communicating with others? The problem is, when you see something, you hear something, you see and hear largely what you expect to see and hear. If you hear something new and different, it gets twisted in your brain and you don't hear it or don't see it. For example, anybody ever hear of the invisible gorilla? Have you heard of this? At Harvard, they did the experiment and they showed people a short video and they told them, count how many people in white shirts, how many times they pass the ball. How many times? Not the black shirt, just the white shirt. And then they asked them afterwards, did you see the gorilla? While they're counting, a girl dressed in a gorilla suit walked into the middle, stood there, beat her chest, and walked off. And what happened? 50% of the people never saw the gorilla because they're not thinking a gorilla is going to walk through here. And they're focused on counting. And they did this many times. And it's about 50% each time. This is a very good book. You should read this book because it's just amazing the insights they have there. So, because of our perceptual filters, sometimes we see things that aren't there, and sometimes we don't see things right in front of us. What is a filter? Your perception. When you see things, they say perception is step one, choose what you're going to pay attention to. But in reality, you and I don't choose what we pay attention to. There's too many things. In reality, we have filters. We block out everything except what we think is important. And then the step two is you try to make sense. What does it mean? What are they doing? And here's the thing. You think as you get older, more experienced, more successful, you get better, right? In reality, often the more successful, the more experienced, the more power, the worse you get. Why? Because you get more and more filters as you get older. So this can create a problem if you're communicating with the girl you want to marry you, or communicating with coworkers or friends, but especially with people from other cultures. In fact, Bill Gates found this out when he went to South Korea. Bill Gates, April 2013, went to South Korea, and he's going there to talk about some business cooperation and some cooperation on some nuclear issues. So this is a very serious thing. And you can see in the photos of him with the president, he's paying close attention to her. But all the Koreans were angry at angry at him. Why? Not just all the Koreans in Korea, it was on the news, the front page of all the newspapers, on TV. Korean media in the United States were angry. Everybody's angry because they said he insulted the president. Why? Because in Korea, you don't shake hands with one hand in your pocket. In America, Bill Gates does this all the time. He just is casual. But in South Korea, you shake hands. You don't put your hand in your pocket with your jacket open. Hi, nice to meet you. To them, it was rude. But the second step in perception now is what you think you see is you think, why do I see this? What does it mean? Do you think Bill Gates deliberately wanted to insult the president? It's not deliberate. It's just he's Mei Wenhua. No, I'm joking. It was a mistake, but he wasn't thinking about it. But they had newspaper articles. They said, why did he do it? Because he does not respect a woman president. Really? And also, he's opposed to her political party. This is crazy. Because he's there for business. Even if he doesn't like women presidents and doesn't like the government, he's not going to do something to anger them because he's there to cooperate. But the point is look at their perception. They not only were offended, but they made it a big thing and started creating in their minds why Bill Gates did this. So, perception, we cannot see things like a gorilla, but also in Korea, they saw something that wasn't there. They saw him not respecting the president, not respecting the culture. In my classes at Xiamen University, I like to teach about perception, and so I show my students something, and today I found this. Today I found one. I live at Shada on the mountain, so a lot of grass. When I was young, I used to be afraid of this, but now I'm not so afraid, but I'm careful. Oh, I see the people. Oh! I pull this snake out, and what happens? What happens? This is a toy, by the way. Hello, baby. So I pull the snake out, and some of the students run out of the classroom. Some scream, ah! And I only had one class where no one moved. Xiamen Airlines pilots. In that class, 40 pilots, I saw 3 or 4. But they didn't move. They have good training. I have great faith in Xiamen Airlines pilots. But in my Xiamen University classes, every time some students are so afraid, and then I ask them, is it logical to be afraid of a toy snake? And some of the students, usually the students who scream, yes, it is logical. I said, why? They said, we didn't know it's a toy. And I say, 神经病. You think even a crazy American will bring a real snake to class? Real one? And if it's real, will it be poisonous? And if it's poisonous, will I leave it in an open bag half an hour so it can crawl out and bite you? Or even worse, bite me? There's no logic that I will bring a real poisonous snake to class in an open bag. So your reaction was not logical, but it was very natural. Every day we all react very naturally according to what we know, what we think, our culture, our beliefs, our motivations, our goals. We react naturally, but not necessarily logically. Why? Because there are too many things in the environment hitting us all the time. So every time something new happens to you, you don't stop and think, okay, I will be logical, 稍等. You don't stop and think about it, you just react. And the more experience, the older you get, the higher you go, the more things happening. And the less you think, and the more you just react. But what you're reacting to is probably not what is really in front of you. Now, is fear of snakes in our DNA? Are we born with fear of snakes? Actually, we learn it. Scientists used to think babies were born with fear of snakes, but then they found out we learn our fears. I remember when I learned my fear of snakes, I was 7 years old in Texas, and I was outside and I saw a worm. Oh, this is my Lao R in 98, and this is me when I was 20, but I was outside and I saw a worm, and the worm was as long as me. I thought, wow. So I picked it up. I'm lucky I picked it up by the head. And it had a big mouth. I opened the mouth and had 2 big teeth. And the tongue going in and out. And the tail at the bottom went. I said, wow, I never see a worm like this. And I said to my mom, who's on the porch, I said, Mom, look at this big worm. And my mom said, ah! So I was young and stupid, but if my mother screamed, I know something is not right. And I went, ah! I threw it away. I'm lucky it was cold in Muslo. And for years, I had this terrible fear of snakes. I had nightmares about snakes. I learned the fear of snakes until I was about 14 or 15. Then I said, this is crazy. So I forced myself to catch snakes and to get used to snakes. And my sons were young and shaman. I had them get used to snakes. We learn our fears. But let me ask you, is fear of a rope logical? Rope. In 1890, William James said, how do you learn new things? This is very important for you to understand because this affects our communication, especially cross-cultural. He said, we learn new things by comparing with old things we already know. You hear something new? For example, here on the left side, most people see this, they see a dog. What is it? It is nothing. It's random blots of ink. But when you look at this, you cannot see nothing. You can't see nothing. Why? Because every new thing you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, your brain 一下子 immediately thinks, what is it most like? If you never saw a dog, you won't see a dog maybe, but most people seen a dog, they look at this and they think dog. And every new thing you hear, like me talking, or see, your brain instantly compare with what you already know. But what you already know may not be right. For example, when my 2 boys, this is my 2 boys when they were small, Xiada, and we used to climb the mountain a lot behind Xiada. But you know, there's a lot of snakes there. In fact, cobras, Yanjingsha, cobras on my porch. I killed a cobra. And just last week, a big cobra outside my house. So when my sons were young, we go walking up in the mountains. And I was walking in front, the brave father, in case of snakes. And my 2 sons behind. And I almost stepped on the snake, and I jumped back. Ah! And my 2 sons laughed. Ha, 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 ha. I said, you can laugh. Your father is in front. I'm the one the snake almost bit. And my oldest son said, we can laugh because it's not a snake. It's a piece of rope. But is it logical to fear rope? No, but it was very natural to fear it because when you're in the mountains, in Xiada, in grass, and you see something like that, the first reaction, what does it look like? Every new thing you see, you compare to what you already know. And I look at that in the grass, and it looks like a snake, and I was so afraid. Wow. So, how do we handle these perceptual gaps? And the thing is when we communicate with other people, they have different perceptions, especially if they're from other countries, other cultures. And you say something that you think is very clear, will you marry me? And they hear something totally different. So I love this. When our President Xi Jinping was a young man, 29 years old in Zhengding, on his office wall behind his desk, he had 和而不同, alike but different. And this, to me, gives a lot of ideas on how to overcome, or at least to be careful when you're communicating with other people, but especially people from outside of China. When I first came to Xiamen, I had a lot of ideas about China that I got from the media. Before I came to Xiamen, I thought everybody in China wears dark clothes, dark hats, and they walk around unhappy. And everybody's poor. And when I got here, I was so amazed to find that, one, not everybody wore dark clothes. Two, the people were not so unhappy. Of course, the economy at that time, China was still pretty poor, but the people were positive and optimistic. So I began writing letters to my family. And I told them, I said, China is not like what you think. And my family and friends were angry because in their mind, China is backwards and poor and all these terrible things. And I'm telling them China is something different. So they're comparing what I say to what they already know. And they know I'm wrong, even though I'm here. I see it. So I said, what do I do? So I realized I'm making a mistake. I quickly realized I don't want to tell them they're wrong. You know, in business we say the customer is king. You don't tell them they're wrong. So I changed my approach. I quit talking about China, and I started talking about Chinese people, figuring if they could understand Chinese people and love Chinese people like we come to, then they'd understand China. So I started telling them stories that they could relate to. 和而不同. First, find the 和, because we are all similar in many ways. We say 和 is harmony, but it's harmony because we have something in common. So first find what we have in common. Let them see that people in Xiamen are just like the people back home. They have the similar dreams, the similar goals, hopes, etc. And then, once they understand that and can accept it, respect it, then talk about how we are different. And help them to see that being different is not necessarily bad. So I told them stories. For example, on the left side here, when Xiamen University told us, it said, you have to eat in the cafeteria, the shirtang, but you can't use cash. You have to use these ration coupons. I said, well, where do I get the coupons? They said, we can't give them to you yet. I said, how do we eat? So they gave us these tickets, and they said, we have too many. So, 用不完了. So I believed them, and later I found out they didn't have enough, but they still shared them. So I wrote letters about these people, and my family and friends loved it, and within 6 months, 500 people were reading the letters, wanting to know more. And I found other ways to talk about China, things they understood, like Aladdin. I showed them Aladdin. Aladdin was Chinese. They don't know this, they're surprised. And I tell them Aladdin was Chinese because the author admired China 300 years ago. I show them things about this, and I also talk about how China solved medical problems in China, the barefoot doctors, and how the US government copied the manual. And I talk about the Belt and Road. This is my oldest granddaughter, and she's in Africa with my sons doing volunteer medical work and how China is helping Africa. So the last thing, if we're communicating outside of China, with foreigners especially, we need to understand that it's not so simply as just talking. They have different perceptions than we do. But I like Confucius said, where three walk together, one is my teacher. But I like to add, also, they are my students. When we're with other people, we're always learning from each other and teaching other people. So we can help them understand. We can communicate more clearly if we remember this, and remember that what you see is often what you expect, but what's reality may be different. Kam Shali.